hear that. Now, let's talk about this proposed armed march on D.C., which has now, at least apparently, been canceled. I mean, my problem with it from the get-go was that he was advocating that everybody submit to arrest, and of course the first thing I did was looked up the penalty for having a gun in Washington, D.C., and it's 1 to 5 years in prison. I mean, are people retarded that they would go there and volunteer for 1 to 5 years in prison? And what other problems do you see with this whole concept that he created to begin with?
Well, it's an interesting case with D.C. They're not necessarily foreign land, but in a sense they are. It's not technically, in a legal context, American soil, because they enjoy special sovereignty status to a point where they're not even considered America. That's how privileged their specific sovereignty status is, and that's permissible by Article 1, Section 8 in the Constitution, and was signed into law by George Washington himself with the Residency Act, and then Congress reinforced that with the Organic Act of 1801 because there was some rumblings about trying to make some decisions that would affect D.C. through the court system, and the founders thought this was just crazy. They couldn't believe it, and they said, well, we have to pass this bill so that we could make it crystal clear. Our intent was to not have the court systems have jurisdiction over D.C., that only the federal government should have jurisdiction over D.C. And the reason this all came about, the reason the Founding Fathers permitted this in the Constitution but did not write it into the Constitution, is because they were using good judgment. They didn't know if it was going to be necessary, but they suspected, they had a strong suspicion that if they attempted to venture this new nation without doing it, that they may need it eventually, and that they would be sorely mistaken if they didn't provide for the opportunity to constitutionally do so. So they left the door open for it, and there was a Philadelphia revolt. That's not what it was called, though. What it was there was some unpaid troops. It was during times of financial hardship, and was some unpaid troops that marched on Congress when they were meeting in Philadelphia. And as a result of that, and this is a testament to how good the government worked back then, in the opinion of the constitutionalist or a small government person, it took them 7 years to pass the Residency Act after this incident. So, we have an incident in America today, and it's, we need a bill to fix this right away, and all of a sudden you have this sweeping new legislation being rammed down the people's throats. And they had an incident where armed troops marched on a meeting of Congress to say, "Where's our money?" And it takes them 7 years to pass the Residency Act, which I think is a testament to how our government was originally intended to be, and what we should seek to restore it to.
Right, and I just want to make sure that people understand what you're saying, that the government taking 7 years to make that change meant that the government didn't just change day to day. It stayed the same. People understood it, understood how it worked, and if any significant change happened, it happened with a lot of careful consideration, and everybody got to weigh in. Where now we get 10,000-page bills dumped, the congressmen don't even read them, and it gets passed, and we have people like Nancy Pelosi say, well, we have to pass the bill so that you can see what is in it. What a change we've had from then to now.
Yes, it's quite a fall from the original intent, and I suppose that's part of Adam's points. But it's what's carried on in the spirit of our people. You can't take that away from us, and we have little victories all the time. And Bob said in his video, we just defeated a federal gun control bill. It was brought about by an awful tragedy, and what are you worried about? It's ridiculous, just hysteria, and this is what somebody with what I suspect is Adam's condition does. They manipulate other people, by stimulating their emotions, and Obama does the same thing. It's the same exact playbook Obama uses when he tries to stir up anger between the classes or the races. It's all about stirring up the emotions, because once you stir up someone's emotions, they become more susceptible to the person stirring up the emotions to implant what they want this person to think or behave like. because they're in that emotional state. Their defenses are down to that person that puts them in that emotional state. And if that person does so in a way where they can make themselves look like they're providing help, that makes the person even more vulnerable to the suggestion and to the implanting of the behavior. It's essentially, brainwashing technique.
Right. Yeah, and, I see what Kokesh tried to do with this armed march on D.C. as essentially an agenda of the New World Order. They just had the Supreme Court, rule that individual Americans have a right to keep and bear arms, period. They lost on gun control, so why would we march on D.C. and give them an excuse to, bring that back into the limelight? And, I look at the timing of it. I look at who it benefits. And to me, it really looks like, and Obama had on his Facebook page, and you heard him say in the video where he was asked about his working for the Russian television station, that he was the Obama's revolution czar, and he had that on his wall. I mean, do you think we're dealing with... Oh, go ahead.
I apologize. What were you going to ask?
Well, I mean, do you think he's got a massive ego? Because, you talk about the psychological aspect and, he may have this mental disorder. To me, I see a paid enemy of the American people. That's what I see.
I think it's a possibility. What my main focus has been is illustrating that even if he's right about a lot of things, that, he's probably just saying what you want to hear, for one thing. And for another, I feel like I can prove to a certain degree that the man is just not fit for leadership roles in life. Regardless of how good he sounds or how much he's right, there's something fundamentally wrong there that, our government's basically run by these people with antisocial personality disorders in the first place. So how on earth could somebody, expect me to buy into the idea that, well, trust this guy with the antisocial personality disorder because he's saying what you want to hear and he's going to be a lot better than that group of guys with the antisocial personality disorders. It's a ridiculous concept to me. But for him to say that he's Obama's revolution czar, and a lot of people that have antisocial personality disorder, they're flamboyant and they're egotistical to a point where they'll tell you right to your face what they're intending on doing and say it with a smile, and it sounds so goofy and outlandish and crazy that people, just think, oh, so-and-so's just joking. That's just the kind of person they are. And well, they're not joking. They're telling you what they're going to do, and they're so arrogant about their ability to manipulate you and pull it off that they'll tell you to your face and then get away with it, and you still won't even expect it after they told you.
Right, just like Obama before he was elected. He said that, some businesses would necessarily be bankrupted, about the energy companies or something. He flat out said what he was going to do, and then he did it, and he still has supporters out there. It's crazy, but, what was it, Hitler, that said the greater the lie, the more people will believe it. And he said, the more we do to you, the less you believe we're doing it.
Yes, because it works through incrementalism. So if you recall, Adam had that whole, dance party on the I want to say Jefferson Monument.
Right.
It was in D.C. though, I believe, right?
I think so, yeah.
So this is the incrementalism. It'll get people used to protesting in D.C., right? So come have this dance event. And then all of a sudden now it's a march on D.C., and he's calling it the Revolutionary American Army. Well, when Hitler rose to power, and I'm not saying, Adam's Hitler, I'm just saying when Hitler rose to power, he had his own, thug squad, the SS, whomever, and their whole thing was to show up at political events with him and, cause a ruckus and essentially take over and then coerce the people at the political event to bend to the will of Hitler. So if Adam's going to start running around politically with his own army, I really felt no recourse but to found the shadow militia. And, people could say, well, you're doing the same thing. But there's a difference in the context in which I'm founding the shadow militia. With Adam and his army, he fancies himself the next George Washington and he's the commander and all this stuff. I founded Shadow Militia to encourage local sovereign units of the Shadow Militia, and I intended to found it just as a central intelligence resource. So, we'll have intelligence updates for people that are members of Shadow Militia. We'll have suggestions and intelligence releases, but we're not going to give orders so much. We'll give recommendations. We'll urge the units to do something, but we're not going to give orders. It's a difference, and I want them to be self-directed, sovereign state militias. I'd rather there be less leaders. Now, this is something more leaders rather. I'd rather not be such a large role leader in this, and it's a very clever tactic that Occupy Wall Street used for their own protection. Well, if we don't have any leaders, who are they going to come after? So, if Shadow Militia has no leaders, there's nobody to come after, and also I just feel like it's more honorable and honest of me to just say, look, this is my concept. I'm trying to help everybody. I'm encouraging you to help yourselves. This is the means I'm recommending you do it in, and you either do it or you don't. There's a big difference between that and seeking to run an army.
Right. Now, I was listening to Alex Jones today because I'm wondering if what you're doing isn't kind of a natural thing that's starting to happen in other places. Somebody called in and said, and I think he was referring to where Kokesh was arrested, that Alex Jones was referring to, these people with something around their arm, some kind of armband or something as feds, as federal government. And somebody called in and said, no, they weren't feds. That was the Philly Watchmen or the Philadelphia Watchmen. So it sounds like this kind of thing is starting to spring up. And it sounds like a good idea to me, of course. The more people we have participating and awake and aware, the better. Now, the Shadow Militia, can you talk about, where you see this going? Do you have a website yet? Are you sure you want to stick with that name? Because I've seen people say, with the term shadow government out there, Shadow Militia might not be the best name. What are your thoughts on that?
I was actually thinking of extending it to Shadow Militia Archangels, because that, at least adds, a name that it ends on a positive.
Right.
Archangels, is showing that you're a good guy. And the reason for the name Shadow Militia, for anybody that's concerned, Shadow Government, Shadow Militia, because we're shadowing the Kokeshite army, which is what I call them, for reasons of brevity, and also I feel like they're kind of brainwashed, and it reminds me almost of Star Wars, where you had the clone army that came to assassinate all the Jedi. You have these Kokeshites that are going to assassinate all the Liberty Patriot people if we let them gain momentum and control what's going on, and if we don't stop them. So, you have the Kokeshite army, and we exist to shadow them, and they're public about their actions all the time, and even if they weren't, we would still find ways to shadow them, and we're going to be their shadow. Wherever the Kokeshite army is, you will find Shadow Militia, and we're just going to make sure that they stay in line. We're not looking to stop them from exercising their rights, and we've been accused of that. People say, well, you're taking away their First and Second Amendment rights. What are you doing? No, we're not doing that. We're just making sure that they don't get violent as they exercise those rights. We're going to be prepared to neutralize any violence that comes from them. We're not going to incite any violence, most certainly not. We're going to be there essentially is a citizen set of checks and balances. We have checks and balances in our government to attempt to make the government work more efficiently. So if we're going to talk about this exercising of Second Amendment rights in a way that's a bit extreme, but it is constitutional in the 50 state capitals. I can't say that it's not, and I wouldn't say that it's not. It's unconstitutional when you attempt to do it in D.C. because of Article 1, Section 8, the Organic Act, and the Residency Act. But the 50 state capitals, I can't say that that's unconstitutional because it's not. It's entirely constitutional. But do I trust the Kokeshite army to do this responsibly? No, not at all. So if we're there with Shadow Militia, and every time they do it, and they know that we're there, and they know that the guy right next to them could take him out in a second if he incites violence, then they're a lot less likely to incite violence. So, we're looking more to win this battle psychologically. We don't want it to get physical. We want to win psychologically, and that should be good enough.
Okay, well, you know, one of the things that I was concerned about with this march on D.C. is that the goal of it was to teach people to submit to arrest, even with guns on their backs. In other words, a psychological operation that never gets violent, but does the damage of training the American people like dogs, that it doesn't matter what you do, you're always going to submit to arrest and you're always going to lose. What do you think the shadow militia couldn't do anything there, could they?
Well, I mean, we can't prevent people from, turning in their weapons for putting themselves in a ridiculously retarded scenario, but at least if we're there and we see them aggressing, we could either threaten to or neutralize that aggression. We would certainly issue a warning to anybody before any further action was taken. We're not looking to have a short fuse here. We're looking to have an extremely long fuse, and we're looking to be responsible, and we're looking to show the American public that gun rights can be exercised responsibly, even in an extreme case of protesting the capitals on Independence Day simultaneously. And that's not an easy task to prove that to the American public. And I look at this as a great test of how are we going to shape public opinion on the Second Amendment on Independence Day. We have two choices. We could leave the Kokeshite army unchecked and risk severe damage to public opinion on the Second Amendment, which shouldn't even matter because it's a natural right, but unfortunately it matters. So we could leave them unchecked and risk irreparable damage to the public opinion on Second Amendment, which would probably affect it sooner or later. Or we could step up, be responsible, take the risks we need to take, be intelligent about it, be covert about it, work with each other, make every attempt to work with the county sheriffs of the counties that the state capitals are in, make every effort to work with local law enforcement so we're not concerned about friendly fire, find some way to have identification between ourselves and local law enforcement. And we stress local law enforcement because we don't trust the federal agencies. Now, we put out a national security brief through the Sovereignty Party of America National Council, and that was sent to a member of the NSA that we know through one of our members and trust. I mean, there are active duty oath keepers in all government organizations, some of them very high up, and we're very fortunate and very blessed that that's the case. So we got it to an oath keeper in the NSA, and we have not received communication back yet, but we are expecting it soon. Okay.
Now, when you're talking about the logistics of this situation, it kind of makes me realize why these, what I hear, the Philly or the Philadelphia Watchmen would have armbands on. If they had an agreement with, for instance, the local police force, look, we're going to be there, we're going to be keeping an eye on things, we'll be the ones yet wearing the yellow armbands, for instance. Is that kind of the kind of thing you might consider?
Well, absolutely. And, I'm part of an organization that does citizen patrols, and because we're a 501c3, when I'm speaking in a political context, I'm not allowed to disclose the name. But, we don't carry weapons. Not every civilian patrol is the same. I don't know anything about the Watchmen, and the Shadow Militia certainly intends to carry weapons. But with this group, we do not carry weapons. And, we're out there in rough neighborhoods where people get shot. We're putting our lives on the line for no money, no benefits, no glory. I can't even say the name, when I'm speaking in a political context, just out of respect for the 501c3. So it really does come from the heart, the people that do this.
Okay. Now, there are several directions I'd like to go with our discussion, but one of them, you've mentioned his affiliation with Code Pink, and I've shown press conferences here on air and shown very clearly that when Code Pink was, allegedly protesting, for instance, the NRA press conference, they were mic'd in. They were wearing microphones jacked into that same press conference, and that it was all a psyop. Their protests are a psyop. Code Pink is working with the New World Order, and Kokesh is working with Code Pink. I got a picture of him holding Cindy Sheehan's hand. So, I mean, how can anybody think this guy's legit?
Right, and he's also friends with Medea Benjamin, who's she's a co-founder of Code Pink. if you Google search his name and you write and then either one of those names, Cindy Sheehan or Lydia Benjamin, hits pop up, and you see them that they've organized protests together. I mean, when you think about it, when somebody does something for a covert mission, whether it's, say, the CIA, for example. I was part of a civilians petty trial. It's spelled P-E-T-I-T. It's pronounced petty. Civilians petty trial at Otla Church in Harlem, and they actually put Obama, the CIA, and Columbia University on trial in a manner that is, according to our laws, it was legally valid. The problem lies with enforcing the findings.
Okay. That's kind of like, what was it, Reverend Manning had a trial of Obama or something back in the day?
Yes, Pastor Manning. I was at that trial, and I got some of the neighbors were yelling at me the first day in front. In fact, if you go to Salon.com on YouTube, if you write Salon, look at their channel. I think it's still one of the top hits on their channel. It's called Birthers versus Neighbors, and this woman's screaming in my face, and she's calling me a racist. And I asked her flat out, I said, "What did I say that was racist, ma'am?" And she goes, "You ain't said S." And she admits that I didn't say anything racist. I thought that made the experience worth it, is being able to have her on film just admitting that she called me a racist for no reason.
Right. Okay, now, you also earlier mentioned the Kokeshite, as you refer to them, Kokeshite thugs. And this might be new to a lot of people, but and I don't honestly even know if you're really aware of it, but we've found ties between Adam Kokesh and his, I don't know if you can call it an organization, because there seems to be a lot of young kids involved, but them and the gang called the Crips. Do you think
Yes.
that this effort to say, okay, never mind, we're not going to march on D.C., we're going to march on all 50 capitals, might be a way to make it impossible for them to be shadowed?
Well, no, because I put out this recruitment video, and it was specifically requesting that we were appealing to Oath Keepers and Patriot Guard Riders as individuals, not on an entire organizational basis, because their groups are 501c3s, and I know a lot about that, and you have to be very careful when you're a 501c3. You could lose a status, and that it's tax exempt, so you can go from being tax exempt to not being tax exempt, and that would put some of these organizations out of business or make things a lot harder for them. So we specifically said in the video that we are appealing to these two groups on an individual basis. Basically, we're asking the members of those groups to review the material, look at the national security briefing, and decide for themselves if they want to help or not. And if they do help, that we are suggesting that there'll be a shadow militia unit, and that they'll be sovereign within their state and just work with other people and figure out how they're going to defend our state capitals on Independence Day. And I have enough faith in the American people and our Oath Keepers and our Patriot Guarders, whose numbers are pretty massive. I have enough faith that we have enough time, and those people are going to do the right thing, and we're going to have a bulletproof plan for national security on Independence Day. So I actually, for as much as I'm at odds with Adam, as much as I suspect he could be a plant or reckless or has antisocial personality disorder, I'm forced to do whatever I can do to actually try to help him not get hurt this day, because he's going to hurt other people with him if nobody protects him. So I'm trying to protect all of us from the fallout of the repercussions of rash actions left unchecked by Adam and the Kokeshites. I'm trying to protect all of us from the fallout. I'm trying to protect the Kokeshites, and I'm even trying to protect Kokesh as much as I'm at odds with him, and I'm furious with him. I forgive him, but I'm still furious with him, and I'm not going to forget, and I'm not going to stop, and he's not going to stop either. So the best way to make sure that we come out of this unscathed, or give us the best probability of coming out unscathed, is to call on our Oath Keepers, our Patriot Guard Riders. The same video, I call on the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street to put their differences aside just for the day, and to Tea Party and occupy their state capitals. And then I even noted there's documented cases of Occupy Wall Street neutralizing a potential violent threat by surrounding the person with love. There was this story about this big guy that stood up and said, "Does anybody want to fight me? Who wants to fight me?" And they got in the circle and held hands, and they said, "We love you, brother. Nobody wants to fight you," and all this stuff. And he got freaked out and ran away.
Wow.
So
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
So
so I think there's a valuable lesson to be learned from that. So hopefully we can all come together and have a great Independence Day together, and Adam and the Kokeshites can carry weapons, and the Shadow Militia can carry weapons, and the government can carry weapons, and no one will get hurt.
now you say no one will get hurt, and obviously that's what everyone would hope to be the case.
I'm
But
saying ideally no one will get hurt, and we're trying to minimize the possibility of that. And if where
right.
there is a set of checks and balances, we're at least making things statistically less likely to get to a point of aggression because there's a set of checks and balances. We're just trying to make the odds better, and that's all we can. That's all we can aim to do. We can't guarantee
Right.
that there won't be any problems.
Okay. Now, what about when you throw a gang like the Crips in the mix? I mean, how do you think that might affect things? What do you think their role with Adam Kokesh and his organization is? What do you think's going on there?
Well, I mean, Adam has stated that he's attempting to, have an army. So you can't have an army if you don't have, enough recruits, and to have any type of operations in America, you're going to need a lot of recruits. So how many places does he have to go? Different gangs. I have intelligence stating that he made a post on a Black Panthers page, and the Black Panthers page title stated that they wanted to harm or kill police officers. And I don't know if he's actually made a deal with the Black Panthers or if he's just attempting to court them. But I know that at the very least there was some communication between Kokesh's Facebook page and its Black Panther page that's threatening to kill law enforcement officers.
Okay. Now, interestingly, we've talked about how we've both received phone calls from Kokesh lackeys. In my case, one of them called me pretending to be NYPD, saying, oh, we found a suspicious substance and all this stuff. And I mean, it was laughable. And the person making the call, talking to me, was clearly very nervous. And you say
Right.
you got a call also. Can you talk about the call that you got?
Yes, he seemed kind of nervous too. Guy sounded pretty young. I could tell he probably knew some of the people that I know here from the local Libertarian Party, just from the names that he was dropping. And I gave him some information about those people that he found a little bit shocking. He was pretending to be media so that I would talk to him. And I knew who he was. And he asked me a couple of questions. He goes, you say that you forgive Adam. He's like, is that true? He sounded surprised by that I forgive Adam. And, how can I not forgive him? It's not, his father was a venture capitalist crook, who was in the same ballpark as Bernie Madoff, went to jail, scammed a lot of people. So, we on the National Council for Sovereignty Party of America, we suspect that, Adam has antisocial personality disorder. We also suspect his father has it, and we suspect that he learned, because it is a learned behavior. We suspect that he, in many cases, that is, sometimes it is biological, but in many cases it's learned. So we believe that he, to learn behavior from him, for him rather, and that it was either a learned behavior for his father as well, or perhaps it is biological. But it's so difficult to begin to even attempt to prove the biological aspect. We're more focused on doing our best to prove with the clinical data we have available, prove to the greatest degree that we can that he's at least highly likely to be diagnosable for antisocial personality disorder in the context in which it would be a learned behavior for him. So seeing the behaviors of his father, it's easy to come to that conclusion. So how could you not forgive somebody if they've been born and bred to have antisocial personality disorder? I mean, in some respects, the person didn't have much of a fighting chance, especially if it's a son and his father. You have a father figure that has this disorder. What are the odds of the son being able to consistently resist it into his adult life and not fall into it?
Right. Well, I mean, on that topic, I tend to look at things as if somebody hasn't changed their behavior, if they don't say, look, I'm sorry I did this, and change, then they're still in a state of conducting, what they did. How can you forgive them if they're still doing it?
Because he doesn't even know that he's doing it. I mean, he probably doesn't know he has the condition. He probably doesn't know his father has a condition. He might he might know. It's possible because he took all those psychology classes, so he might very well know. But through forgiveness comes clarity of thoughts. If there's the old saying, "He who angers you controls you." If I couldn't get over my anger with Adam, I wouldn't be able to develop strategies to neutralize Adam. If I spent all my time in anger, it wouldn't work. The thoughts wouldn't flow right, or the delivery of the thoughts that I had wouldn't come across pure or proper. It wouldn't be conducive to my goals of just trying to protect everybody from the fallout that would come through an incident, through the Kokeshites and Adam's irresponsible actions. So at least if we can have that set of checks and balances that is not, commanded by me, but requested by me. If we have good Americans step up all over the country, we can have that set of citizen checks and balances. And I'm trusting the good judgment of the American people here. I'm not saying that, I'm going to make sure, and this is under my direction, and I'm telling people, what to do. It's just, these are my suggestions. Take them for what they're worth. I'm trusting that the people that have this information are going to do the right thing. And basically, I'm trusting that there's more good people in this country with guns than there are mentally ill people in this country with guns.
Right. Okay. Well, it's interesting how you see these things in terms of good people versus mentally ill people instead of good people versus bad people. I mean, do you think that there are bad people? Do you think there's good people, mentally ill and bad? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting, and, who's to really say what's good and bad, but, I mean, there's certain things that are unilateral. I mean, if you're, you watch somebody commit a murder and it was unprovoked, it's unilaterally wrong. It doesn't matter what religion you believe in, if any, and it's something, there has to be some type of standard for what's right and wrong. So I think that most people that might be perceived as bad, probably are mentally ill. And as I said, some people are biologically born that way. So, were they born evil? Yeah, I suppose that if somebody is born biologically that way, they were born evil. But can they control it? I mean, are they responsible for the evil if they were born biologically different? But that doesn't change necessarily how you would neutralize that evil. I mean, you can't just not fight somebody that's displaying these symptoms and manipulating people and hurting them. You can't just allow them to continue and say, well, it's not this person's fault. But when you're using restraint in regards to how you neutralize a threat, to restrain or to injure as opposed to, take things too far, to use the minimum amount of physical force you need to do to subdue a threat as opposed to going overboard. You have to be better than the people that you need to confront physically, not stoop to their level. And it's a very fine line to walk, and it takes a lot of discipline, and it doesn't come easy to everybody. But I have to put my faith in the people, because I'd rather put my faith in the people at large getting this message and these recommendations and executing them responsibly. I'd rather put my faith in that than put my faith in the Kokeshites, because I've interacted with enough of them to begin to profile them as a group and check out their demographics and whatnot. And it seems to be, by the large, 20 and 30-something-year-old males that, clearly don't have positive role models in their life that they're following. So they're following Adam Kokesh, and they're absorbing his mental illness and making it their own. And that's part of what the ponerization process is.
Okay. Now I've, been speaking to you for a couple years now, and I've seen you, go through your run for Congress, and I want people to know that Anthony Tolda is just a normal guy. He's not some rich person that has a ton of money to run for Congress, and could you speak a little bit about what you're doing with the Sovereignty Party? Because it's like, I see you involved in a lot of stuff here, and I'm wondering, how do you sort one thing from the other? How much time do you devote to the different things? What are your ultimate goals here?
Basically, I try to do as much good as I can wherever I can, and I spread myself pretty thin between, just regular work so I can pay my bills and, doing what I do as a candidate, as an activist, as an individual, as a volunteer. to just try to set some things right and balance some things out in this world. And when I see a void, I don't agree with everything that Michael Savage says, but I've heard the man say some extremely intelligent things. And sometimes he says something that, it's almost like he read my mind. And he said once, he goes, I don't even necessarily want to be the one that's saying and doing the things that I'm saying and doing, but I see such a lack of it, such a void that, and I know that somebody needs to fill it, so I fill it. So when I see a void, or just a cause that I'm passionate about, I do what I can to work towards it and towards helping a situation, whether that's founding Shadow Militia or founding the Sovereignty Party of America. And I've dealt with the third parties. I've dealt with the Republican Party, and it's been a train wreck. And I have to believe I could do better. So I founded the Sovereignty Party. And, with this whole D.C. issue, it's kind of ironic. A few short months. I founded April 25th, 2012. So not that long after I found, here's these proposed D.C. march, and most people don't understand D.C.'s specific and privileged sovereignty status. And, here I am on various radio broadcasts explaining the privileged sovereignty status and the history behind it. So I feel like I've certainly earned the name at this point, now that we're coming to this conversation.
Right. And, don't you think that Kokesh, or at least if he's being managed, whoever would have been managing him, they got to know that D.C. is not part of the United States of America, and that, you can go to prison for having a gun there, regardless what the Supreme Court ruled. They still enforce that. That's another thing to me. How could he ask other people to go there and submit themselves to prison?
It's one or two things. I mean, either it was an honest oversight, like he could have just been, totally overzealous and having that vaulting ambition that Shakespeare warned us about, and just said, well, yeah, I'm going to D.C. because it's the best, target, and they'll get us the most press and all this stuff. And, his handlers, these people aren't always the brightest bulbs. That's another thing about people with antisocial personality disorder. They're very, very crafty and very intelligent, and oftentimes manipulate people that do not have a psychological disorder and get one over on them. So in some respects, there's a degree of intelligence there, but in other respects, they overlook a lot of things and don't tend to think things through as much as they should or as thoroughly as they should. So they slip up a lot. So if you're intelligent enough and you're good-natured, you can outsmart them if you know how to spot their behaviors and just have self-discipline, let them to make you angry, and just wait for the opportune moment to outsmart them. So it's either one or two things. Either they knew it and it was part of the ruse to lure people in to push an agenda or allow for a government response that would have been a lot worse than had it been anywhere else. Because personally, you ask me, if there's an attempt to be invaded on for DC to be invaded upon, DC they're not going to forget the Sovereignty Act, they're not going to forget the Residency Act, and they're not going to forget Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. They're going to remember pretty quick, and they're going to have an ironclad defense to totally overreact. I mean, we're not going to consider it an ironclad defense, but the mainstream media would. So, it was either a very nefarious plot to usher in martial law, or it was just an oversight due to arrogance and vaulting ambition and being overzealous. But either way, it seems like he's gone sour on the idea, and it did come 24 hours after a video I put out there. And I explained in the video how this is an invasion of a sovereign territory, that they're not America, and I also explained that we recently got video footage of Kokesh calling the Constitution a failed experiment. So when you combine those two things, what do you know? Well, you know that he's disrespecting the Constitution, and if he's calling it a failed experiment, he's essentially saying, he's not respecting or operating within it anymore. When you combine that with the fact that he's assuming a militia role and seeking to invade D.C., he's combining an implied act of war with a statement that he's considering the Constitution obsolete as a failed experiment. something else he seems to have in common with Obama. Obama seems to feel the Constitution is obsolete as well.
Wow, that's
So,
I think that's a crucial point right there, in that Kokesh agrees directly with Obama that the Constitution should be scrapped. I mean, that you can't deny that, can you?
right, but I mean, his twist on it as well, because of the abuses. And if it was that great, we would have never had to deal with the abuses. No, that's not it. If all the people that were, following him like a bunch of little lemmings, if those types of people, because those types of people will always exist, the people that follow people like Kokesh mindlessly without doing any due diligence, if those types of people have been fighting the way the types of people like you and I are, Harry, the whole time, we would have never had this problem. So there's a certain degree of, responsibility with the public for dropping the ball as well. And, granted, we're up against people with a lot of power, a lot of money, that a lot of them have these mental disorders that make it easy to manipulate people. Our educational system is awful, so, in a sense, some people aren't giving a fighting chance. But a lot of it has to do with, just being personally motivated and taking control, taking your own power. And a lot of people choose to not do that. And they have, we have freedom in America. They've, or at least enough left of it. They have the freedom to not claim power for themselves. That's their choice. But I think we certainly have a better America if more people were choosing to claim power for themselves that didn't have these mental disorders.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. And we've taken up an hour and a half of your time, so I don't want to keep you up too late. I really want to thank you for coming on the broadcast, Anthony. And is there any websites or anything you'd like to get out there?
Sure. My old campaign website's still up. It's still set up for donations, and I'm soft campaigning for Congress for 2014. I'm not aggressive about it right now because I'm building the party and just founded Shadow Militia. But if you'd like to donate to me, you could at Tolda2012.com. That's TOLD like dollar, A like America, Tolda2012.com. We also have sovparty.org, which is short for Sovereignty Party of America, SOVparty.org. That's relatively new. It's not set up for donations yet, but we should have a P.O. box to send to by the end of tomorrow or the next day. So those two websites I'd recommend. You could look us up on Facebook, Shadow Militia on Facebook, Sovereignty Party of America on Facebook, Anthony Tolda for Congress, Anthony Tolda. Any of those ways, you could look for me, and YouTube as well. I have some interesting videos blowing the lid off of this whole Kokesh scam or whatever it is. I'm halfway between believing he's an operative and or he could just be individually crazy. But looking at his father and, donations with him and the Democrat Party and the fact that he was a Democrat, you think about the Obama administration facing at least 3 or 4 impeachable, scandals at one time. They're in fight or flight mode. This is the perfect thing that they would need to, turn the attention towards the American people being bad, usurp a bunch of new powers, and keep themselves in power. When you think about it. And Kokesh has the perfect cover when you think about it. As I was getting at earlier with Obama, I kind of got off on a tangent telling you about the trial, but during the trial, they had evidence that Obama and his mother were CIA operatives. And when you think about the case of Obama, it kind of made sense. There weren't a whole lot of Americans that were able to speak, the languages that Obama was able to speak. I believe it was Farsi or Arabic or both. In the 80s, if you remember, after 9/11, they had difficulty finding people to translate some of these videos we were receiving. They didn't have a whole lot of people that were, working with the government to translate these videos for them. There's a shortage. So there's certainly a shortage in the 80s. And so his cover, supposedly, and according to this evidence, is that he was a Kenyan businessman when he was traveling in Pakistan, and he was an American at other times. He was able to have this Kenyan cover because his father was Kenyan, so it was easy for him to have that Kenyan cover and then the Kenyan passport, and because of the dual citizenship of his father. That's another thing. According to British law, any person that's born to any British subject anywhere around the world, even if it's only one parent, they are automatically a British subject. And you can't be born a dual citizen and a natural-born citizen. It's an automatic disqualification of status. So the location of the birth certificate, doesn't even matter. Just the fact that his father was a British subject, according to British law, therefore compromising his natural-born status, capability, or potential here, it's a dead-in-the-water theory from the get-go. He's not a natural-born citizen. He could be a naturalized citizen or a citizen, but he can never be natural-born. It's impossible.
Right. Now, since you bring up what's referred to now, almost in a derogatory term by the mainstream media as the birther issue, I know Orly Tates was all over this. Was that eventually resolved in any way, shape, or form? Is it still ongoing? What is the latest on that?
It is. Sheriff Joe Pio seems to be making the most headway at this moment, but there's been plenty of other times where people are making headway, and unfortunately nothing happens. So, but when you think about it, though, when you have this issue that's not going away, I mean, we don't know if anything's going to come of it, but it's not going away. Plus, you have Fast and Furious, you have Benghazi, you have the IRS scandal. It really looks bad for this administration, and I suspect they're in a fight-or-flight syndrome, and they're desperately trying to find a way to fight and stay as opposed to flight. And I suspect that this mess with Kokesh could be their perfect plot to stay. Right.
Okay, well, Anthony, thank you so much for being on air and for all you do fighting for freedom up there in New York City, and we look forward to hearing from you again.
All right. Sounds good, Harry. Always a pleasure to be on with you.
All right. Have a good night. And that was Anthony Tolda up there in the NYC, where he is tirelessly working to fight for the rights of people who really, frankly, don't deserve them. It's hard to argue that some of these people that sit around watching television, stuffing potato chips in their mouth, deserve the good efforts that people like him put forward. But, as I always say, when you defend your rights, you're defending everyone's rights. In other words, people like me who get in armed standoffs with the police when they try to violate the Fourth Amendment by walking into my home might make them think the next time, well, maybe I won't just go ahead and barge in this home, even though that's just some fat slob stuffing potato chips in his mouth who doesn't even have a gun, just sitting there watching TV. And in the same sense, all of the work being done by all of the activists exposing truth, promoting freedom, benefits everybody. In the same sense, all of the work not being done by those who just sit around and do nothing hurts everybody.
We would like to thank all who tune in, and especially all who bring others to the network so that we can unplug them from the false reality. Remember, you can show people how to tune in on their cell phones by searching their internet radio application for TBN. Truth Broadcast Network would especially like to thank its tireless broadcasters who sacrifice their time, energy and resources working against the enemy. There is a price to pay for their selfless efforts enlightening the world. Thus we thank broadcasters, and ask the audience to be supportive by spreading the word about the live broadcasts and spreading the archives as much as possible.